come spend the day with me in the kitchen. I need to make apple pie filling, apple cider vinegar, I need to can some pickles, but first I need to make some bread. I don't know if anybody else is like this, but I would rather do all of my kitchen work in 1 or 2 days and do it all in bulk instead of having to do it every single day and do it in small batches. So I'm going to be making bread to get us through the week. We usually only eat maybe half a loaf of bread, sometimes a full loaf. If we have any scraps, they'll either go to the chickens or to the pigs, and they absolutely love it, so it doesn't really bother me if we don't eat a full loaf through the week. I'm just making my basic sandwich bread recipe today. It is already up on my blog, so I'll have that linked down below if you want the recipe. And if you would rather watch it in video form, then I do have a really in-depth tutorial on how to make bread and the different loaf pans and stuff that I use, so I'll try and link that down below if I remember also. I recently have been trying out new flours in the kitchen, and I've tried just an organic basic flour, and then I am using organic wheat flour today. And I will say we like it, but it is really different than just your regular white flour. And even the organic, just all-purpose white flour, it is completely different. So it is a bit of an adjustment, but I think we do like it. It's just gonna take us a while to get used to it. I'll probably start cutting the recipe, doing half wheat flour and half white flour. With the flour that I'm using right here, which is a wheat flour, it is a dry milled flour. So you have to cut back on the amount of flour using. That's why I'm not giving measurements in this video. I'll just link to the recipe because I was not using my typical measurements just because I had to cut the amount of flour that I was using based on how dry this flour was. One thing that I try to do always, but especially on the days that I am going to be in the kitchen all day long, is to clean up after every single project or just thing that I'm making. So the bread, I'm going to clean up from that. That way I don't get too overwhelmed because I don't really have all that much kitchen space, especially countertop space. So I have to put it back as I go or I get so overwhelmed by a messy kitchen. The next thing I'm going to work on is my apples. So I'm just getting down my apple peeler right here and I'm going to go ahead and get that set up. It's super simple. It just fastens to your countertop. You can use it on any countertop. Sometimes I was kind of nervous to get it too tight because I didn't want to leave a mark on my countertop, and thankfully it didn't. Today I'm going to need my big stainless steel bowl and stainless steel strainer so that I can clean my apples and cucumbers. So I went ahead and pulled those out, and I went ahead and changed my oven racks so that I could get some jars in there and sterilizing. These are cleaned jars that they have already been washed with soap and water, but they actually don't have to water bath can for that long. So I'm going to go ahead and put them in my oven to go ahead and get them sterilized. In my stainless steel pot, I'm going to go ahead and start getting my apple pie filling, the mixture mixed together. And all it is just some sugar, water, and some spices. I am currently working on writing the blog post for this recipe. It is not going to be up in time for this video, so check back in a day or two and it'll be linked down in the description box, or you can follow along on Instagram and check my stories there because I always link my blog post there in my stories. So you can check either the description box in a couple days or you can check my Instagram. But I'm not going to give measurements in this video just because it's not just a basic recipe. It is customizable to how many quart jars or pints that you're going to be making, so you will have to alter it based on how many you're going to be making. I picked up these Golden Delicious apples from our local Mennonite store, and Golden Delicious apples are my absolute favorite. Most people like to use Granny Smith, especially whenever you're canning, just because you want to use a little bit of a harder apple so that it'll keep its shape and it doesn't really turn to mush. But the Golden Delicious apples turned out perfect for me, and they do every time. I'm just working on sorting out some of the apples, and I'm going to put them into a strainer so that they can be rinsed off. And you actually want to wash them really well just because fruits are one of the most sprayed things out there, and these were not labeled organic, so I wasn't really sure how much they had been sprayed. So I did wash them very, very thoroughly. And then I'm going to move them over to the island so that I can start using them on my apple peeler. You can see here that whenever I put the apples onto my apple peeler and start using it, it does still move around a little bit, and it's going to do that until you get it tightened all the way down. Once you get it tightened all the way down, it doesn't do that anymore. But I was so terrified to make an indent in my countertop, so I was trying to keep from putting it so tight, but I ended up having to put it pretty tight and it didn't leave a mark. So probably don't be as worried as I was, because it didn't leave a mark at all. After I finish running the apples through the apple peeler, I grab a cutting board and a knife, and I actually like to cut mine directly down the middle, so just cut every one of them in half. But if you have any pieces that are left on top with the peeling left on or on the bottom, I do like to add those into my scraps, just because I don't really like those in my pie filling. I don't like biting into a piece of the peel. I don't know, it just kind of ruins it for me. So I do like to remove every bit of the peel from the apple, but that's just all personal preference. And you do want to make sure that you keep your peels and your cores if you want to make apple cider vinegar. You don't have to, but you totally can if you want to. My jars were done sterilizing, so I went ahead and pulled those out of the oven and sat those onto the counter so that they could be filled. But first I actually had to knead my bread dough, and a little trick that I always do, especially on days whenever I am super busy in the kitchen and don't have time to clean up a huge mess of bread dough or flour on my countertop, I'll just knead it in the bowl. And I know that a lot of people don't like to do this, but I think it saves the mess, and as long as you can like stretch it and just knead the best you can, get some flour in there and work it really well, I think it turns out perfect every single time. Now I am back over to my sterilized jars, and I'm going to start filling them with the cut apples. I don't really get particular with this. I know a lot of people want a certain amount of apples in each jar, but I just pack them in there until I cannot fit anymore. And there's a sweet spot there. You just have to find it, because you don't want to pack them so tight that your apples start to break, because I like to have full apples in my pie instead of like the little tiny chunks like squares. But if you prefer that, cut your apples however you like. I just like mine cut in halves. I'm still waiting on my pie filling to boil. So while I'm waiting on that, I'm going to go ahead and get some half-gallon jars and start putting all of the apple scraps, so the peels and the cores, down into half-gallon mason jars. And this is going to make apple cider vinegar. But all it takes is your apple scraps. You can do this with full apples if you don't want to make apple pie or whatever. You can just use full apples. It does not matter. And then you're just going to put those into your jars, fill it about 3/4 of the way full. You're going to add however many cups of water it takes. But whenever you top them off, you want to make sure you keep count of how many cups of water you're putting in, because however many cups of water you put in, you're going to put 1 tablespoon of sugar per cup of water. I hope that makes sense. I went ahead and filled my jars with my apple scraps, but I actually have to set them aside for a little bit because my Berkey water filter is filtering water right now, and it does take a little bit of time to filter. It just cannot keep up on these heavy canning and working in the kitchen days. I had already filled up my pot with water on the stove, so I have to wait on it to filter some more, because you want to use a high quality water in your apple cider vinegar. While I'm waiting on my pie filling to come to a boil and on the water to filter, I'm going to go ahead and do dishes and clean up some of these larger bowls that I had my apples in. I have got to clean my kitchen in between each little phase, or every time I get a little break, because I don't like doing mounds and mounds of dishes at the end of the day. I'd rather do little bits throughout the day. And plus, for my pickles, I have to reuse these same dishes, so they need to be cleaned and ready to go whenever I start my pickles. Now that my pie filling has finally came to a boil, I'm going to go ahead and start filling my jars with the pie filling over top of the apples. And you'll notice that mine is runny compared to most people's, and that's just because I don't put, I think it's called clear gel or the ThermFlow, into my filling. I don't really like that, just because I would rather thicken mine after, whenever I'm ready to actually make my pie. So whenever I open my jar and pour it into a bowl or my pie crust, I just add some flour to thicken it that way. I don't like to always add so many additives to my canning process, if that makes sense. And the clear gel and the ThermFlow, I know that they are perfectly fine and healthy and USDA approved, but in my mind it's just another additive, and I'm not really a fan of that. I would much rather just open the jar and use flour, so that's what I do for my process. Once I got the jars debubbled, my lids and rings put on, it was time to put the jars into the water bath canner. And I'll have all the instructions based on your jar size and stuff on the blog post that I'm going to have for the recipe. So that'll all be included on there. There is so much work that goes into these days that are full days spent in the kitchen, whether I'm canning or just bulk cooking, whatever I am doing. It takes a lot of time, and there is a lot of prep time, a lot of clean time that goes into this, but it makes it all worth it because we're going to be able to start our renovations soon, and I'm really hoping that I can have all of the canning finished before we get to renovations, because whenever we start renovations, they take 100% of our time, pretty much any of our free time, and we're still trying to do the farm. We still have to harvest our corn this fall, and we're trying to get our gravity wagons and everything ready for that, but it all just takes time. And every little bit that we do here in the kitchen, I try and do it in the summertime, because we have found that during the spring and summer months, there is very little that we can do in here in the house towards our renovations, just because we need to spend that time on the farm. It's just the best way that we have found to split our time. Of course, we still have regular chores to do, so feeding and watering all the animals in the afternoons, we still have to take care of that, and in the mornings, I take care of it in the mornings, and Ben does it in the afternoon, so it all works out. But we're going to have to be spending more of our time inside since it's going to be cold, and while we're doing that, we're going to be working on the dining room next, and we are so excited to not have to take our food and eat it on a small little table. We can finally have our dining room table in there, have family over, have get-togethers here at the house. We are so excited to finally be entering into our next phase of renovations. After I got my half-gallon jars filled with the apple scraps, sugar, and water, now it's time to put a fermentation lid on, and I only have wide mouth fermentation lids, and I did end up actually putting glass fermenting weights down in there to hold them down, but this jar right here is a regular mouth jar, and I actually don't have any coffee filters because we don't drink coffee, so I just used a small kitchen rag here, and I put the lid directly over top. That way no bugs or anything like that could get in, but it could still get air so that it could work off. So if you don't have fermentation lids, then just use a coffee filter or a rag. It will all work the same. You just need to make sure that it can get some air, and it needs to stay between 60 and 70 degrees so that it can work through the process. After you have your jars filled, you're going to let them sit for 2 weeks, and after the 2 weeks, you're going to strain off and remove all of the apple scraps from the jar. You're going to put the liquid back inside the jar and put the same lids back on and allow it to continue to ferment for 2 more weeks. And after the 2 weeks, you should have your apple cider vinegar, and it should smell vinegary. If not, then you need to let it sit even longer. After I put my second batch of apple pie filling into the water bath canner, I am now moving on to cucumbers. I'm washing them really thoroughly. And these cucumbers did not come from our garden. Our garden did not actually produce very many cucumbers this year at all, but I bought these from our local Mennonite, and they are perfectly fine cucumbers. I don't care to buy locally. I just don't like to buy from the grocery store. I hope that makes sense. I just would much rather have homegrown stuff than the cucumbers and produce that you can get in the store, just because the majority of it is waxed to make it last longer, and I don't like that because it is extremely hard to get off, and that is why you're not supposed to can with it. But I'm going to be making bread and butter pickles and also dill pickles just because we had hardly any canned earlier this year. I think I did a few pints, and I think that may be in a previous YouTube video whenever I made dill pickles earlier in the year. We like to keep our pickles really basic. Really, those are the only two kinds of pickles that we eat. We eat the dill pickles on sandwiches and hamburgers, things like that. And then with the bread and butter pickles, I use those in tons of recipes. So anything like potato salad, macaroni salad, egg salad, I always put bread and butter pickles in it. I just love the sweetness of them. And honestly, I could eat a whole jar of bread and butter pickles just because I love them so much. Before I add my brine to my pickles, I have to put the bread into the oven, and I actually take scraps out to my chickens. This is one of my favorite things about chickens. I just love whenever they come running at you, and they totally clean up all of our scraps. If they don't eat them, or if it's something they don't like, then I will give that to the hogs. The only thing that we found that our pigs will not eat is peppers. They absolutely hate peppers, but the chickens love them. So if the hogs won't eat something, then usually the chickens will, and vice versa. I am finally taking out my second batch of the apple pie filling and gonna mix up the brine for the bread and butter pickles and the dill pickles. The bread and butter pickles, I don't really have a specific recipe. It's really basic. So I just do bread and butter. I just do the cucumbers, and of course I do onions in them. I do like onions. You can leave that out if you don't prefer that. And then it is regular vinegar, so white vinegar, apple cider vinegar, and mustard seed, celery seed, sugar, and you can add turmeric or just whatever you want. Some people add it for coloring, some people add it for flavor, and you can substitute turmeric for a lot of other spices. So if you don't like turmeric, because I know a lot of people don't, you can always substitute it. And for my dill pickles, normally I would do fresh dill from the garden, fresh garlic, but we actually did not have either of those just because it is so late in the season. My dill died forever ago, back early on in the summer, and so all I had was a Mrs. Wages pack. So I did end up just going with the Mrs. Wages pack for the dill pickles. My canner had been going all day long. I ended up getting 16 quarts of the apple pie filling. I got 10 pints of the dill pickles and 7 pints of the bread and butter pickles. And then I ended up getting 7 half-gallon jars of apple cider vinegar that are still working off. But now it is time to finally clean up the kitchen and get something going for dinner. But I'm going to go ahead and close out this video. So thank you guys so much for spending the day in the kitchen with me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and hopefully our next video will be moving on to renovations.